Welcome to the Just Third Way podcast, where we ask the question, would you rather own or be owned? Brought to you by the Center for Economic and Social Justice at CESJ.org. Hello, listeners. Thanks for joining us again. Today, we're going to go back over the core values and the plutocracy story of the week. But we're starting with our special guests for the core values. As usual, we have Dr. Norm Curlin. Hello, Norm.
Hi, Dave.
Hi. And then we have Dawn Brohan. Hi, Dawn.
Hi, Dave. Good to be back.
And Mike Graney. Hey, Mike.
Hi, Dave.
All right. So we're going to go through the core values back from the beginning again, and we're going to read them. And then we're going to highlight the last three today. And then we're going to discuss those a little bit. Let's start by reading the core values from the beginning.
There is an absolute source of all creation and of all universal and absolute values, such as truth, beauty, love, and justice, which represent the highest ends of human actions. Many people call this source God.
Nothing should stand between God and the human person.
There is a hierarchy of human work. The highest form of work is perfecting the social order to elevate each person in his or her relationship to God. The lowest but most urgent form of work is for sheer personal survival.
In interacting with nature to promote one's own perfection, every person must respect the rest of creation. Each human being, a steward of nature, remains responsible for conserving natural forms of existence, each of which is interdependent and shares the same divine origin with humanity.
Under the ultimate sovereignty of God, all sovereignty in the social order begins with the human person, not institutions, including the family, the state, organized religion, the business corporation, the labor union, or academia.
The essential means to achieve the sovereignty of the person include such inalienable human rights as the right to life, liberty, and access to productive property and free markets, equality of opportunity, and the secret ballot. These rights, including the rights of property, are not ultimate ends in themselves, but they are intermediate ends or fundamental means to enable each person to pursue truth, beauty, love, and justice.
All right, and then we get to core value number 7, 8, and 9, which is the subject of today's call and podcast, and that is the following. People create tools shaped from the resources and energies of nature to support the economic and social sovereignty of the person. Through private property ownership, each person can become master of the technology needed to realize his or her fullest human potential and dignity. People also create and maintain social institutions as highly specialized, invisible tools designed to serve highly specialized social functions within a just social order. Institutions, as organized expressions of society's values and goals, largely determine the quality of each person's individual and social life. As historical creations of humanity, carrying within themselves the wounds of history, institutions are continually in need of healing and perfecting. The highest responsibility of each person is to pursue absolute values and to promote economic and social justice in his or her personal life and all associations with others. So that brings us to the end of the full list of the core values, and those last three there, I think, are significant because it's kind of like they're separate amongst themselves because they start to suggest the action that we are suggesting that people take, as opposed to the first ones we're just proposing ideas. So I think that is why today's subject is very important because we're transitioning from the ideas and talking about things that sort of we take for granted and turning to what we should do about it. Wouldn't you guys agree with that?
Yes,
Yeah, absolutely.
yes, we.
All right, good, good. Well, uh, I was gonna ask Dawn first. On that first of the last three, I'll go ahead and read that one more time before I ask you. People create tools shaped from the resources and energies of nature to support the economic and social sovereignty of the person. Through private property ownership, each person can become master of the technology needed to realize his or her fullest human potential and dignity. So, Dawn, why do we use the language about tools shaped from nature?
Well, I think this particular core value has a lot of important ideas contained within it. But to start, that notion of tools is very important that we understand. And one very simple dictionary definition is that a tool is a device or implement, especially one held in the hand, used to carry out a particular function. Now, that definition is looking at the most primitive types of tools that people create, hand tools, but one of the important points is that it's something that assists people in carrying out an action, a particular function, not a million different functions, but one particular focus. And when you think about it, you have one way of looking at the world or how we produce is that you have people, human beings with whatever capabilities that they have, whether physical, mental, spiritual, entrepreneurial, creative, whatever. But they're intrinsic to each human being, meaning it's a part of them. Outside of them, you have the raw materials that nature provides. You have the energies that nature provides. There are all these things that are external to us that in order to make a tool, to differentiate, if we were walking along and we see apples lying on the ground and we pick them up and eat them, that's a human being consuming what's nature has provided. But let's say we need to get higher up on an apple tree in order to pick the apples, so we build a ladder. Well, what did we use in order to build a ladder? So that's an example of taking materials from nature in order to create a tool to help us achieve a particular function. Now, if you take it to a higher level, we're going to talk more about this in terms of institutions as another form of tool, very sophisticated, but they like a hand tool should be, I should say, they're designed to carry out a specific function, not a million different things, but a specific thing, do it well, help human beings achieve whatever objective they have, the purpose.
Right, right. Well, I like the way you put that illustration about, getting the ladder, but even if the ladder is made of aluminum, that comes from our environment, you know. It's like everything that we deal with as humans is something that was already there in one form or another. We just refine it and shape it. So, uh,
Exactly. And I think we've talked in previous sessions about Louis Kelso's idea called binary economics. And it really, when you boil everything down into, how do you produce goods and services to sell? Well, you got people and all their skills and talents, and then you got everything that's outside of people. And these are, originally whatever nature provided for us. We start with that, and
right,
then we create tools.
right, right. Well, then it goes on to talk about economic and social sovereignty. Mike, what is that all about?
Well, fortunately, I can build on what Dawn already said. Uh, Economic sovereignty, as I define it, is living and sustaining a decent life for oneself and one's dependents without being economically dependent on anyone or anything else. Now, that doesn't mean that you're autonomous and living in isolation or alone. Being interdependent is different from being dependent. I mean, you rely in any society on others being around you and working with them, but not necessarily working for them, sort of the master-slave relationship. You don't want to be dependent on the state especially, but you also don't want to be dependent on a private employer or a slave master or even your institutions. So that your economic independence is important for an interdependent society. But your social sovereignty it's related to that, but it's a little bit different. It's it's how you maintain your place in the social order without barriers being put in the way of your full participation in the institutions of the common good. Both economic and social sovereignty ordinarily require private property in capital so that you can, have the power you need to participate in the economy and in your institutions. In other words, as a full member of society. That's why, for instance, Aristotle said that to lead the good life, the life of virtue, you need a modicum of private property.
Right. Yep. That is very important. And I think the founders outlined that also. And I think that the sort of inequalities that we're seeing now, you've got some that have accumulated these huge amounts of private property when so many others don't have any. And so it's almost like we almost have something worse than slavery when, the slaves, at least they knew sort of what their purpose was in a way. It's well, really
actually,
weird.
Aristotle gave almost exactly the same analysis you just did. See, in ancient Greece, a slave actually had more status than a free, non-owning worker. Wow. Because a slave belonged to a rich master who had status, and this was reflected onto the slave.
Yeah, wow. Dave, I want to just mention in reaction to what Mike just said, we all recognize that no human being should be the tool of another. And
absolutely.
And that's one of the points of Louis Kelso, is that you got people and you have tools. And, people should be masters of the tools and institutions and not the other way around. So we can kind of forgive Aristotle for, maybe not being as enlightened regarding the humanity of the slaves. But Mike's point that in terms of just subsistence, in some cases, if you didn't have the means to feed yourself, you're going to starve to death. So, but
I would almost rather be a slave in a good time than someone who's trying to support yourself in a boom and bust, downturn. So.
Well, as long as you said almost.
Yeah, and also, yeah. You just made a very important point. And that is, I think, the danger our society faces today is that so many people will give up their freedom and become slaves in order to survive. And so that's one of the things we have to guard against if we want to, develop our democracy and full participation in the common good. We all have to have a source of power, which also means a source of for us to be able to produce what we need in order to sustain ourselves.
Right. And we're going to get into that a little more later, too, as far as slavery and the wounds of history. But right now, Norm, I was going to ask you, why do we feel private property is necessary to master technology and reach potential?
Right. Well, one thing that we have to understand is that private property is not the thing you own. It's the rights and powers and even limitations on those rights. So you can't use whatever things you own to violate fundamental rights of others, the freedom of others, the ability of others to develop to their full capacity, and which should be and is the end that the Center for Economic and Social Justice is trying to achieve for the world. And that is private property, so that we can differentiate between a slave, for example. Private property means the rights of control. It gives you power. It gives you rights to make decisions on how to use it. It also gives you the right to the fruits of what's produced. So if you own the apple tree, then the fruits belong to you. And that's very, very important. But on the other hand, you don't want to use the things that you own, whether it's a slave or it's a physical tool, in order to benefit yourself at the expense of the world, and as at the expense even of the slave. Because Aristotle said, when the looms learned to weave for themselves and the plectrum could play for itself, at that time, masters will no longer need servants and slaves. And of course, many of us look at today's world and we say we have a new form of slavery. It's called wage slavery. So that means you can only be a person who contributes your labor, and you get the income from your labor, but then you're being replaced by energy slaves, by robots, by artificial intelligence. It's new systems that would avoid having to use fossil fuels, but being able to harness the energy of the sun, for example. And so when you ask what is private property, what's its relation? The relationship is to take tools that you can begin to see ways of advancing the use of those tools or the design of the tools, whether they're physical tools or social tools. And so CESJ, its responsibility is to help people see there's nothing wrong with the process of taking what exists, whether it's from nature, natural resources, or the physical tools, and say we have to begin taking them in ways that enhance life, enhance the dignity of every person.
I see. Yes, yes. That's very, very important and very true. I think we have just such a lack of capital ownership because people don't care about, being owners. They'd rather be more or less wage slaves. And that, what unfortunately they don't realize is that's taken away their freedom. It
Yes,
really is.
Dave,
So,
once you understand that the nation state, or even if someday there be a global state, it's only a tool. It's a social tool. And you have to be very careful that the tool doesn't become more important than the people. And so it comes down to power. We want to empower people, even an individual who, if 99 and 9/10% of the population disagree with that person in the beginning, social justice says, no, don't worry about that. We have to provide that person enough personal power, independence, a justice, which will then give him freedom to continue to advocate, and finally others begin listening. So Kelso, any of the new paradigms, there's somebody had a eureka. And once and the other people haven't seen it yet, and the educators haven't brought it to their attention, but that person tries to get others to see it, just as we in CESJ are trying. We come together to agree that there's something very basic that the world needs, and we see that. And we engage in the process of not only teaching one another, but also the process of bringing it into academia, bringing it into education, so that all people begin to see the new concepts, the new principles, the new social tools, the new physical tools, so that then they can see ways of avoiding war and climate change, suicide, terrorism, etc., the kinds of things that could, with the right system, take some of those people who would have done evil to others and enable them to see that their highest purpose from the beginning is to be able to develop their own talents, and no matter what it is, whether it's music or politics or art, but working for what Aristotle called the goods of civilization. And you'll do that if you have the economic power. You'll do it free because it's satisfying and because it's good and will help others.
Right, right. And I might edit this and put some of that at the end, because that last core value talks about that, and that's what you always call the work of civilization. And I think that is very important. But I'm going to go ahead and read the next core value. I believe it's number 8. People also create and maintain social institutions as highly specialized, invisible tools designed to serve highly specialized social functions within a just social order. Institutions, as organized expressions of society's values and goals, largely determine the quality of each person's individual and social life. As historical creations of humanity carrying within themselves the wounds of history, institutions are continually in need of healing and perfecting. Don, what are some examples of social institutions? I know that's kind of I guess that's talking about churches and things like that. But what are some examples, and why are they important?
Yeah, as you mentioned, Dave, an institution can be something, very small and maybe not lasting too long. Kids putting together a baseball team, for example, that's a way human beings organize themselves in a social way in order to carry out a particular purpose or objective.
Oh, okay. I hadn't thought of that.
Yes, so taking it, very simply. Now, we also talk about institutions as invisible tools. One example is, going on today. It happens to be the midterm elections. And so the whole voting process is an institution. And we can see that it all doesn't necessarily work as well as it should in terms of empowering each human being, or people feel disenfranchised, or, possibly they are, you certainly could look at the time of segregation, that if you happen to be African American, you couldn't vote. And so you had an institution that was designed to carry out an important and function in terms of a democracy, being able to secret ballot, for example, being able to elect someone to represent your interests, and to elect the people who are going to be putting together the laws, which we hope will be just. But we see that institutions, they can become defective, they can become exclusionary, as long, though, as the main purpose is to carry out a just social purpose. Then we would say, and this comes from Father Ferry and Pius XI, that we don't just destroy our institutions, we organize together to fix them, to identify where the defect is. In the case of people denied voting rights, we had to change the laws. And so that institution was improved. And we see, well, there are other things that perhaps need to be done. The whole, in my opinion, the whole process of gerrymandering is not one which is socially just, and that we have to find better ways of doing certain things that people feel that why they have to use gerrymandering. But in any case, so you have, in terms of important institutions, you also have one of the key ones is our money creation institutions, such as the central bank. And people today, very few people really understand what kind of tool that was designed to be. Taking the Federal Reserve, for example, when it was first put together, the function of it, and Mike is really our expert here on the history of the Federal Reserve, but if you look at the act that formed it, it was created so that you never would have to worry about whether there was enough money, currency in the system. If businesses needed to grow and businesses knew they would have customers to buy the products, there really was no practical reason to limit money to, for example, something that was finite, the existence of how much gold was in the system, for example, that really it was a way of financing growth out of the future savings, the future profits of the new capital that was being brought into production. And so the Federal Reserve became a way to systematize the money creation process. But it was really meant to only help finance private sector growth. And of course, it went off course. And so here you have a misunderstood institution that's really critical to shaping the world, and its influence on the whole world right now is so profound, and it's creating such chaos and so much really injustice and suffering. But that's because our tool, it's not, something's gone wacky and we have to fix it. So that's part of what CESJ is striving to do, and that is also looking at not only creating money for future production, future capital formation, but also making sure that the money comes into being in a way that creates new owners of the new capital that's going to be formed. Because you can't just have, okay, we want to make sure businesses have whatever money and credit they need to buy new capital and produce. The businesses have to make sure that they have customers with money. And if you have more and more wealth and income getting concentrated in fewer people, businesses are going to have fewer customers. And so it just is unhealthy for everyone. And it's healthy to have a broadly owned capital throughout the economy.
I'd like to add to what Dawn is saying, that by talking about something like money and seeing that it's misunderstood in the policies and the laws affecting the money system, the tax system, the inheritance system. But one institution that I think has to deal with all of the issues we can talk about is academia, because they're supposed to promote understanding of the truth as new discoveries, such as the principles that Kelso brings to bear in Bucky Fuller, in Father Ferree, and Martin Luther King, and even Gary Davis, world citizen number one, Gary Davis. They came in with ideas. But academia is not teaching these. And even what's the value of money? Bucky Fuller said, well, there's one way to do it, and that is look at the price of the kilowatt hour. Can you imagine that? All countries are going to need that. And suddenly what money is supposed to be is a yardstick of value. That's what Kelso said. And he's right. Any lawyer should understand that. It is not currency, but it's the symbol of currency. What's behind it? It's a way in which you can carry on transactions between people.
Right.
But academia and our school system, has to be altered so that people can have not just from a monopoly of teaching, but rather parents should have choice as to where their children from the beginning of their education are going to be educated. And that way, again, monopolies are bad. The only one we should tolerate is the state itself. But then we should have diversity, and power should be in the individuals, all persons in society.
Right. Well, Mike, I think they stole some of your thunder. I was going to focus in on that phrase. It says an institution within a just social order, and I bet you're going to kind of go over some of what they were saying when you talk about that.
Well, actually, what I was going to do was alter your question a little bit.
Okay.
Because Norm only gave the examples of the institutions. I thought, well, why not say something about what makes a good institution?
Good point.
Be somewhat more general than and less specific.
There you
And I
go.
thought, well, a good institution within a just social order is one that assists the people within that institution in becoming more virtuous. That is, more fully human, because that's what virtue means. Virtue comes
That's
from
true.
Latin, meaning humanness.
So
And it's
some of these employee-owned corporations are helping their employees to become better people.
well, hopefully they are. If they're
Right.
structured in a way that is consistent with human nature, real human nature, not corrupted nature, well, yes, the people within that institution will become more human, more virtuous. And we become more fully human, virtuous, that is, by building habits of doing good. That's what a virtue is the habit of doing good. And we do that by exercising our natural rights of life, liberty, and private property, but not just exercising our rights in whichever way we feel like it. We have to do it in a way that not only meets our needs, and refrains from harming others, but also it enhances the general welfare, the general atmosphere around us, the general environment. Because if everybody is, doing their own thing in a way that benefits only them, that's going to show up really quickly in the social order within that institution. Because suppose someone says, well, I can get what I like by lying all the time. Well, you may get what you like, what you want by lying all the time, but then you're helping build a culture in which everybody lies in order to get what they want.
That sounds familiar.
Yeah. Well, I wasn't trying to draw an actual parallel to anything. Or you call me a liar. I don't know.
I was just saying, it seems like all of society is built that way.
Well, that's because they're not being virtuous the way I want them to. They're not following my orders.
Right.
Yeah. But so when an institution does not assist people in helping them be virtuous, that is, it prevents them or inhibits them from becoming virtuous. It's the duty of everyone in that institution to get organized. And this is what Norm was talking about when he talked about the act of social justice. What you do is you organize and restructure the institution so that it once again assists people in becoming virtuous, so that they can build, the habits of doing good. And this changes the institution from, in the Catholic Church, they call it structures of sin and structures of virtue. In other words, an institution in and of itself is not sinful or virtuous or anything else. It's just an institution. It's a social habit. It's what is that habit? Does it help us, the human beings in it, to become virtuous or vicious? If it's an unjust institution, it assists people in becoming vicious, filled with vice. If it's a just institution, it helps them become virtuous, more fully human.
And I think an important point is that the institution has to be structured so that this access is universal, it's equal. Because as soon as you start denying access to people, or you deny certain rights in that institution to a particular group of people, then you're creating an imbalance, you're creating conflict, you're creating an atmosphere where people will tend to divide themselves. And and I think in terms of sovereignty, for example, that denies people their basic sovereignty, the right to control their own lives, the right to receive their rewards based on their contribution, because you may be limiting their ability to participate fully.
Well, our conversation about core values 7, 8, and 9 ran a little long, so we broke it up into 2 parts. And that was the end of part 1. And next week we'll have part 2. And now for the plutocracy story of the week. I have been following the saga of Jeff Bezos and his relationship with the federal government for a little while. It just is very interesting to see that some of these super successful people have been very closely involved with the federal government. I don't know. I wasn't there. I can't tell you how Jeff Bezos got his start. I can tell you that there are some so-called conspiracy theories that talk about the CIA basically starting Jeff Bezos in his career. He's obviously a very smart guy. I never want to criticize someone who is very hardworking and capable and creative and intelligent, becoming, very successful and wealthy. But if it is found that he has an unfair advantage because of the whole process of, black budgets funneling money to help him do things, and that comes back to the money system. It's not transparent. We don't know what's going on. There's no way for us to know if the CIA gets money that's just created, billions and trillions of dollars. There's no way to know. We need citizen ownership of the Federal Reserve. That's what would change that. We would find out what's really going on. But anyway, the interesting story I think that happened this week is the Amazon East Coast headquarters has been under development in terms of planning where they're going to put it now for really a couple of years. And my hometown here, Atlanta, where I live, was one of the candidates. And a lot of people were excited, talking about all the thousands of jobs that it would bring and stuff like that. Well, this week, it became apparent that, I guess it was leaked out right about the time of the election, so it wouldn't be huge news, that basically Virginia has been selected. So Northern Virginia, near Arlington. Actually, it's very, very close to the Pentagon. I mean, they could have direct communication by, line of sight transmission with the Pentagon from this location. And this is about plutocracy. That's what this series that I'm, bringing you guys is about. And the relationship of the super rich and government. Do we want one of the most powerful businesses that's grown into really a monopoly, located and interfacing just absolutely directly with our federal government, our defense, which has become offense? I mean, it's just so apparent what's going on. You just Google one time Jeff Bezos and CIA. And I mean, these are recent stories. You've got $600 million computing cloud built by Amazon Web Services for the Central Intelligence Agency. I mean, how hard is that? $600 million? That's a lot of money. How hard is it to be successful in business with these kind of things infused into your overall business model? I mean, there's a article that, the ACLU has demanded that Amazon stop powering a government face recognition program. So now we've got this admittedly, according to the whistleblowers, unconstitutional monitoring of citizens that's been going on for years. And now it's being augmented by a monopoly. Folks, this stuff is getting crazy. It really is. I mean, this is fact. This is not conspiracy. And so I'm looking a little farther into this thing, and Bezos, obviously he's going to choose the Washington, D.C. area for his East Coast headquarters because, I mean, it's been in the works all along. It turns out in 2017, he bought a massive place right in downtown Washington to convert into his own residence. I mean, this thing is 27,000 square feet, $23 million before he starts all of his renovations and everything. And like I say, I'm all for people being successful, hardworking. Buy yourself as many houses as you want. Nothing wrong with that. But I mean, this is the former textile museum of Washington, D.C. It's just, I mean, the more you look into this stuff, it's just insane. I mean, it's so obvious. He put that there to entertain bureaucrats and the heads of these organizations who decide what companies are going to get their contracts. It's just too obvious. I mean, he owns the Washington Post, but having a headquarters right there in the Washington, D.C. area is not only an opportunity to entertain bureaucrats, there's also going to be quite a few high-level, good-paying jobs. I mean, who's going to be the East Coast executive over, warehouse distribution? I mean, that might be somebody's congressman's brother-in-law. That's how these things work. So before you say that we need pure capitalism and no government intervention, just remember, this is what kind of stuff results. It's just natural for power to concentrate into one area. And there must be steps in place to unconcentrate power. And the way to do that is a methodical program of widespread ownership. And the only fair way to do that is in the money creation process. You loan money into existence for productive business growth and have it flow through the retirement accounts of all citizens so that not only over time people build wealth, but they have dividends that accumulate on an annual basis and help them with everyday expenses. That would be much better than someone controlling billions and billions of dollars that they've built because they sell the absolute lowest price product with no shipping charge. So naturally everybody's going to buy from them. But instead of it being the free market that has allowed them to do that, it's relationship with government, taking tax money and fake money and giving it in huge contracts. I hadn't even realized. I mean, it's so much worse than you even think. And nobody's talking about this stuff because the media is part of the game. They're being paid not to talk about it. So anyway, it's just really obvious. I will add that the story that came out this week that the East Coast headquarters is going to be Virginia, but it's going to be split 50-50 with Long Island, New York also. So I did hear that. So I wanted to add that it's not all Virginia, but it is just so apparent that, that's what's going on. So crazy world. It really is. But anyway, have a great week. You can join CESJ by going to cesj.org and clicking on participate, and you can become a paying member for $25 per year. And also a student membership is $15 per year, and that qualifies you for discounts on our materials, such as books, which you can buy many of and distribute to your friends and family. And also, if you'd like to participate and comment on the podcast, feel free to call. I have a voicemail set up. I'd like to hear what you have to say, and I'll play it on the podcast. The number is 678-719-2840. Own or be owned.